Welcome
to
Creative
Characters.
It's kind of fun.
Monotype.
Welcome to Creative Characters for Monotype, a show where we meet the people working at the intersection of type and everyday life. I'm your host, Livia, and I'm here today with my esteemed co-hosts, Carl and Cadley. Hi, Carl. Hi, Cadley.
Hello.
Hello.
So we are here to do probably our favorite episode of the year. It's our second annual recap of the Adobe MAX conference. The three of us were all there earlier in October for 3+ action-packed days. And I don't know about you, but I think I finally have gotten back on a normal sleep pattern. How's everybody else feeling?
Yeah, same. It definitely took a while to recover there, but I think I'm all good. It was worth it, though. I would say it was a really, really good week.
Yeah, I'll agree. It's a lot of stimulation for quite a few days. Like a little buzzing city just kind of like erupts in the middle of Los Angeles at the convention center. Thousands and thousands of creatives coming together, flashy like demos, all the treats you could ever want to eat. It's just like it's just a nonstop experience, I feel like.
Yeah.
I know. A couple times a day, they wheel out trays of different snacks and stuff, and it's kind of like a bit of a Lord of the Flies situation because just huge crowds descend on these poor people with like trays of whatever. And, you have to be very strategic about when you line up, and it's wild. Did you guys have a favorite midday snack?
I think my favorite that I got a chance to actually get to was the horchata, which was surprisingly delicious.
Yeah.
And I kind of miss it, to be honest, that sweet Adobe MAX horchata.
I was going to say the same, Livia. It was like, I guess horchata iced coffee, right? It was just like constantly mainlining caffeine into your body like the whole week, but
I know.
It's worth it.
It is worth it. And you definitely need it. I mean, like Carl said, it's very action-packed. And really, there's really no reason to leave. They feed you, they give you treats, they give you coffee. There's all the entertainment you could ever need. So it's truly, truly a very unique experience.
They take your wallet, they take your personal identification. No, I'm kidding. They don't do any of that.
You can shop. This year you could get your ear pierced. Remember there was ear piercings happening?
Yes.
For free.
No reason to leave.
But yeah, it's pretty cool. And, last year, 2022 was the first live edition of the conference since the pandemic had happened. And, there was a palpable sense of relief in the air. I think people were just like excited to be there at all. Sort of that kind of, wow, what a weird shared experience we just went through, right? And, that was kind of the vibe. This year, Cadley, you were describing it really well. It just had a much more connected feel to it, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I feel like multiple times through the sessions I saw and just the people we spoke to, everyone was just like, I guess almost like a sense of relief and just like gratitude for having this space to come to for a few days. Like as creatives, I think a lot of us are like still in our homes a lot of the time or not together in person. And like maybe a lot of us also feel like kind of like misfits and depending on like what your kind of working situation is. So coming together where like the only focus is really just like creativity for 3 days. It's like being in a playground where you just feel like you can completely be yourself. And that's what I felt like a lot of people were kind of getting at when we talked to them.
Yeah, I also noticed in a lot of the sessions, but a lot of the discussions that we were in, there was this sense of vulnerability, almost people talking about their personal lives and kind of how this idea of, feeling like a misfit, maybe feeling out of place, how that kind of brought them to a place like Adobe MAX where they're able to connect with people that are kind of maybe in the same headspace and kind of connect through these personal experiences. I had a really, really great time just kind of learning about the whole person, not just about the design work that they're presenting.
Yeah, I couldn't help but wonder if something about the pandemic experience had cracked open a desire for people to share and to really connect, after this forced disconnection that we all experienced. A lot of the presentations were very personal. I think, Livia, you and I were sitting in on one together with Dana Taniguchi, who was going like deep into her family history and, talking about how it influenced her work. And we were both kind of sitting there like, man, this is like therapy in a way. But she was not the exception. That was kind of the rule. And it was striking to see people sharing so much on stage like they were.
It was really striking. Yeah, I feel like in a lot of corporate settings or conferences, at least that I've been to, you kind of stray away from talking about personal experiences. But as you said, this definitely did not feel like the exception, but the rule. And it makes me wonder, maybe it's something that's special and unique about this industry that we operate in, that you kind of bring your whole self to work.
I would say if anyone's listening and has a thought on this, leave a comment on social and let us know what you think. And if you were there, if you noticed something similar or felt a similar way, we'd love to hear about it. So before we get to the interviews, I think we should probably talk a bit about where these interviews happened, because we had a huge booth at the conference with all sorts of different activities. And we actually had our very own personal recording room built into the booth. Why don't we describe a bit what the vibe was like at our booth? Because it was pretty fun this year, I think.
Yeah, I think it was great. We had this amazing kind of activation called the Font Connection, which we will get into in more detail later.
Yeah, and visually it was like our brand designer Marie was kind of like, I think, the mastermind behind the entire booth, but it was like we had a pink wall. The Font Connection sign was this like really lovely neon sign. We had a huge pink M that was covered in pink sequins that I think Livia was responsible for putting together, but it had a bit of a Barbie-core vibe, but like in the best way. Pink and red was like the theme for this year, so.
The year of Barbie. I love it.
Charles, Nix, and Marie and Sarah from the studio gave a presentation, and Charles walked up on stage in a just fabulous pink suit. So Barbie core was, let's say, a sub-theme to what we were doing. But yeah, we, while at the booth, we invited people to come speak to us in our little recording closet, but then we also threw on headphones and grabbed a mic and went out and spoke to people on the floor as well. Why don't we kick it over to our first actual interview, which I believe, Cadley, you had the honor of sitting down with this absolutely fabulous guest.
Yes. So the first person I spoke with at Max was Zipong Zhu. Firstly, in our annual Type Trends report each year, we always end up highlighting their work. It's just like super wild, really colorful, lots of patterns, amazing animations. Just like they kind of felt like a celebrity idol to me because I've been idolizing their work in our Type Trends report for the past couple years. And then Livia and I also saw Zipong speak at Brand New in Chicago, but it was this like fiery, super fun talk. We were both laughing. Zipong's also an Adobe partner and gave a talk at Adobe MAX, which the three of us all also made it to on the last day. It was at 8 a.m. on the last day of the conference, and it was pretty much a full room. So I think that also speaks for itself. People are willing to wake up early and just laugh, cry. I think we all might have cried during the talk at the same time, but the talk was about type and animation, and I walked out of it feeling like, oh, I could animate, and I don't know how to do that at all.
We'll kick it over to you and Zipong, and everyone have fun.
Hi, my name is Zipong Zhu, and I am an artist designer born and raised in China, currently live in New York City, who wants to make every day a razzle-dazzle musical.
How do you go about making every day a razzle-dazzle musical?
I think the easiest is to wake up with a bolt of energy and just try to release them into the world. But visually, I wear very loud, very colorful patterns. And then in my work, I also try to basically give people a espresso shot when they see my work.
I definitely feel that. And when you say you wake up with a bolt of energy, do you wake up naturally like that? Do you have like any rituals or crazy things you do in the morning?
That is an excellent question. I'm actually a terrible morning person. So in order for me to provide energy, I try to wake up later in the day. So I start usually around 10:30 and 11 with my cup of cold brew usually.
And can you tell me a little bit about your background? So like, did you start it as a designer? Did you start as an animator? Like, how have you built these skills?
Yes. So I actually started off as a illustrator, and then turns out I can't draw. So I decided to forego that and then switch gear to study graphic design in the States. I was doing illustration in China, and then I picked up animation a little bit along the way. And from that, I just started to become an animator. And it was really cool because I get to utilize that technique to help me to express myself.
So your personal style is obviously very vibrant and colorful. Has it always been that way? Is this a style you've been like developing?
So I was born and raised in the south of China, basically the Miami of China. So colors are everywhere. There's bold plants everywhere. But then when I first moved to New York, I was told by my wonderful mother not to stand out. So I really hid myself in the world of navy and black and gray for the first few years. And also at the time, my name was Phil. I had a self-discovery moment, basically realizing that my name Zipong means an exuberant child. So I really want to celebrate the meaning of my name by owning the exuberance of it all. So with that, I started to do a lot of colorful work and incorporating a lot of patterns using extremely bold typography. So yeah, I think it was in me the whole time, but I just need to rediscover it.
Love that. Do you think it's easy to stand out in New York, such like a crazy place that's so busy? Like,
I think the key is not to try to stand out, and it's just try to do you. Like, the wonderful thing about New York City is when you're doing something right, people will let you know. They will scream to you across the street, they love your outfit or something witty that I'm wearing. Yeah, it's really nice.
I feel like that translates to your work too. So I think that like your work stands out, and when it does, you're being appreciated. So can you just talk about the biggest achievements you feel like you've had as a creative?
Yes, totally. I think one of the projects that I had the honor to work on was to create a PSA for Times Square on the subject of Stop Asian Hate, because I think as a designer, it's really often feel that, we are just here to make some flat files and then that's the end of the day. And then with this project, I was able to stand up for my people with the cause that I really cared about, and also just to stand against racism and violence. And it's just something that I felt like I always was standing for, but I don't know what's the outlet. And then this project really allowed me to achieve that, and I felt very honored that I was chosen to do the project.
I feel like part of what they talked about kind of ties into what we were mentioning at the top of the episode around bringing your whole self to work. And I mean, it sounds cliche, but really just being true to yourself. And when you look at Jipang's work, it almost feels like an extension of themselves or a reflection for how they experience the world. So I think it's really great that we were able to sit down with them, talk a little bit more deeply about it.
Yeah, and I mean, you mentioned earlier this idea of vulnerability. And I mean, here you have a designer whose entire life and personality, or at least a good chunk of it, is not only on display, but is threaded directly into the work. And it's a really beautiful story of personality blossoming and just resulting in this immense output of vibrant, colorful design. And the connection in the room when they were speaking to the audience was electric. And it's simply because you have someone on stage who's just being themselves and translating all of that into design.
Yeah, and if you would like to see the work, if you haven't seen it before, Zipong's work can be found on Instagram at ZZ Design. Get ready. If you have epilepsy, I think there was literally an epilepsy warning in their animating talk.
There may have been.
So if you're like, don't do well with flashing stuff, maybe stay away.
Yeah.
A little disclaimer.
So let's shift gears a little bit to our next guest. I had the opportunity to sit down with John Rochelle. John is the brains behind two type foundries, Comicraft and Swell Type. And John is actually part of our Foundry Partner Program. So Comicraft fonts are available through Monotype Fonts and a few other places where people can buy fonts along with Swell Type. John was on the floor on Wednesday of Adobe MAX and actually spent some time at our booth doing a demo of comic book lettering. Comicraft is, of course, a type foundry that focuses on comic book lettering. And so he was there to kind of show off some of the tricks and skills that he's developed over the years. And so he sat down with me for a while and we talked about his history, his take on the industry, and why music and bands are so intertwined with design. So here's my chat with John.
My name is John Rochelle. I run two font foundries, Comicraft and Swell Type. And Comicraft is focused on creating fonts for comic book lettering, and Swell Type is more large typographic families with a lot of features like variable fonts and open type alternates and all the fancy gizmos and things.
And roughly how long have you been doing that? How long have you been in the type design business?
I got my start designing type in the early 90s. I started working for a comic book letterer who was trying to transition from lettering with pens to lettering with a computer. And he didn't have a whole lot of computer skills, but he was very good at lettering comic books. So I sort of took over the font creation part of the process and just loved it. Immediately was like, I can make fonts. This is the coolest thing I've ever seen or done. And so made all kinds of fonts for lettering comics, doing the sound effects and the titles and narrative captions and villains. And we're just creating all kinds of styles and got a lot of requests to make them available for sale. So started doing that in like mid 2000s. And then it's become my full-time job in the last about 5 years.
And so for you, did your love of comic books predate font design, or is that something that you got into at the same time, or is that going back to your childhood that you were just into comics, or how did you end up in this specialty?
I always loved reading comics. When I was a kid, I went through a big Spider-Man phase. So I loved the aesthetics of them, and I always appreciated the lettering, but though I had no idea like who did it or how that division of labor went down. But I always appreciated it, and I was also into graphic design and playing in bands and making flyers for my bands. And when I went to college at UCLA, I was working in the advertising department on campus, as well as being a design major. So I got a lot of computer experience in those jobs. And then after graduation, one of the first jobs I got was part-time doing the comic book lettering, which just sounded like a lot of fun. I didn't really know what it would entail, but it just was like, oh, I like comics, that'll be cool. And became a career.
Yeah, and I think when, for kids who are in their own band, the idea of coming up with the logo and the identity and stuff is maybe, a big part of the fun of it too, right? So did you play in bands, did you say, or just being associated? And what kind of bands were you in?
Yeah, so I guess I probably started playing in bands around the same time I started reading comic books, which is, those early teen years, it was my whole life in high school. And just imagining like getting to design our album cover, or getting to design the tour t-shirts or the stage or whatever. The design was always kind of wrapped up in the music. And so design became a job, music's always stayed a hobby, and I think it's a good balance that way.
Yeah, well, you spend so much time flipping through records or CDs, seeing other bands' logos and thinking like, I want to do that, and I want that to be us. So you transitioned to kind of doing your own thing. What are some of the lessons you learned starting your own foundry that you would pass on to people who are thinking of doing the same thing, or mistakes or challenges or just things that if you could go back and do them a second time, you do them differently?
Starting the foundry, at least the first time with Comic Crop, it was very much a slow growth, organic thing that sort of came out of the process of making the comic books. I enjoyed the font making. I was always happy to do as much of it as I could. The idea of it actually like being a full-time job didn't seem possible at first, and then it probably took 10 years before we had enough fonts and in enough places that it was generating enough income that it could even pay one person's full-time salary. And it was probably another 5 or 10 years before it could pay two people's salaries. So it took a long time, and font building is a tedious process. You really have to, it's creative, but you also have to just enjoy kind of getting lost in technical minutia for hours at a time. And then the big thing I learned starting Swelltype, which I did in 2000, was I was feeling really frustrated and limited by the comic font business, and like, everything has to be comic booky, and I have all these other ideas, and I like all these other genres, and comic books are pretty wide open as far as like, you can do horror and you can do fantasy, and there's a lot of flexibility within that, but I wanted to do fonts that were a little more typographic and more serious. And once I started doing that, I also realized I wasn't quite sure who I was making them for. And I realized with the comic fonts, I had this very specific audience that I was designing for, and I knew exactly who my customers were, and I got a lot of direct feedback from them about like, oh, could you make something like this? Could you make something like that? Here's what we need. Here's the characters we need, or the styles we need. And doing Swelltype, it was like I had all this freedom, but at the same time, I really didn't quite know what to do, and I still sometimes struggle with like, what is it? What is the angle for that, and who is my customer? And figuring that out is taking some trial and error and kind of seeing what hits and what doesn't. And it's a much slower feedback process. The fonts come out less often because they're a lot more complicated to build, and then it takes sometimes 6 months or a year before you're seeing like sales reports come back in and be like, oh, what do people like and what do they not? And you kind of never know.
As your business grows and you start to evaluate opportunities to sell, whether through your own website or through other platforms, another thing that's very true about type design as an industry is that the people in it tend to have very high integrity. So they're very cautious about where they sell and how they go about it. So like for you, what's that process been like in determining who you're going to partner with? How are you going to make your fonts available to a wider audience? Did it happen organically? Were you very intentional about choosing where to sell and where not to sell your fonts?
For the most part, I sort of want them in as many places as possible. Different marketplaces have different kind of customer bases. I think as long as the terms are fair and as long as you're being treated respectfully and as long as you can find that there's a place for you. I mean, there's some things where I just feel like there's just way too much in there. You get lost in the shuffle. It can be kind of hard to get noticed. So, look at those marketplaces and see like, just what I have to offer. Is it complementary, but also is it something that maybe there isn't a lot of there, so that hopefully people who are searching for what you have will find it.
That's another theme that's come out, is that type design is related to labor of love. You don't get into it, with riches in mind and, I'm going to have houses all over the world. You kind of get into it because you love it and you love the tedium of it and like the perfection. You don't meet many type designers who are not perfectionists. So for people who are drawn to that, how do you take that and turn it into a business? Like, how did you sort of like work your way through that transition to where you could actually turn it into like a viable product that people wanted to buy?
I'd say at the beginning, don't be too precious about it. Just kind of get something that works. I mean, a lot of the fonts I built early on for Comicraft, I was building the fonts. It was like, hey, we have this comic. It's due at the end of the week. We need a font for the villain or whatever. It was like literally get A through Z and some punctuation in there and export it, and we're using it. So then when it came time to release something commercially, I would sort of dig through my folders. All right, what's, kind of half finished that I can complete? But it was still a matter of like, sometimes good enough is good enough, and you can always release an update. Don't feel like you've got to have every language support and every open type feature in your first font, because you'll never finish. You can tweak endlessly. I mean, fonts are kind of like records. People have told me they're never finished, they're just abandoned. You just get sick of looking at it and you're, fine, okay, here, let's put it out. And then, 6 months or a year, you can kind of open it back up and be like, oh, actually, you know what, I want to, add Greek or Cyrillic or something, some more support. So they're always kind of an ongoing process of being refined and improved and growing. They're never done.
If you'd like to check out John's work, check out comicbookfonts.com for everything from Comicraft, or swelltype.com for Swelltype. And as we mentioned at the beginning of that interview, John is a Foundry partner, so you can find his work on Monotype fonts as well as myfonts.com. So guys, one of my favorite things about Max is that you just kind of never know who's standing around in your booth. Did you have any really unexpected conversations?
I did. I actually ran into Annie Atkins one day. I came back to the booth and she was kind of standing there by herself. And I was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe I was like, what are you doing? Do you need help? Yeah, I was like
amazing.
Pretty starstruck. But
Annie Atkins, for those who don't know, is an amazing movie prop designer who's worked on Wes Anderson films, among others, and was a season 2 podcast guest here at Creative Characters. So the reason I ask is because while I was standing around waiting to interview John, I saw a man also standing around our booth. Looked like he was waiting for something. So I had all my gear on and asked if he'd like to be on the podcast. Turns out he's an independent comic book artist from Salt Lake City who was there specifically to meet John and attend the comic book lettering workshop John was about to put on. And we just had this great conversation, which we'll share in a moment. And this is one of the things I love about this conference is you just never know who you're going to meet.
I'm Chris Hoffman. For my day job, I work for the University of Utah. But the other thing that I do is I do independent comic books in Salt Lake City, Utah. And so we publish the comic book, The Salt City Strangers, which stars the Gull. It's all about a set of superheroes who are in Salt Lake City. And it's kind of like if the Avengers were in Salt Lake. And so the superheroes are all themed around Utah things. So the state bird of Utah is the California seagull. And so there's the Gull, there's Golden Spike Den Mother, the son of Bigfoot, and Deputy Deseret. Comicraft is essential to us working on that because we use it for all of the dialogue in the comic and all of the onomatopoeia. And so we're huge fans of the Comicraft fonts.
That's amazing. So where did your love of comic books start?
So when I was a kid, a friend of mine, Andy, who was my best friend in the world, I would get into anything he was into. So he was into basketball, I was into basketball. He was into comics, I was into comics. And so we would ride our bikes to the local comic book store, Comics Utah, and buy everything in the quarter bin. And if there was a story we wanted, we would each buy the opposite issues, and then we'd trade to read them together. Eventually, I ended up working at that store for a while. I kept buying books about making comic books, and I kept getting asked, like, are you going to make one at some point? So I kind of got challenged into it. And so, yeah, comics has been in my DNA for a really long time. The digital publishing, like how it's made it so accessible back in the day in the 90s, how everything was like so handmade, right? All of the digital publishing has made this so much easier to just do by yourself. So you don't need the permission from any of the big publishers to do it. You can just go do it yourself.
And then you use Comicraft's typography to do titles, lettering, dialogue, and everything.
Yeah, it's such an overlooked what makes a great comic book. You can have some of the best artwork in it, you can have some of the best storylines, coolest characters, but if you can't read and you don't know what's going on, then the whole thing falls apart.
One of the things that I loved seeing at the Monotype booth is seeing people kind of come together. And I thought it was so cool how we interviewed two people that just loved comic books, and one person was there to see the other.
Lots of connections happening at the Monotype booth.
So speaking of connections, we had an activity at our booth this year that was all about connecting people through type. And Livia, you were helping people quite a bit as they went through this activity. So why don't you describe it to us?
So what Font Connection was this kind of dating app style 2-player game that we had set up at the Monotype booth. And we had people coming through, again, playing in twos, whether it was 2 friends, 2 coworkers, 2 strangers. Basically, they answered some questions similar to what you might see on a dating app. So their ideal first date or their ideal vacation. And then based on kind of the vibe of their responses, it set them up with a font. And then at the end, it told the 2 people how compatible they were based on their font choices. So some of the matches were really good, like 95% match made in heaven. Some were not so great. It was like 30%, 20%. So you saw relationships being made, relationships being broken, all in the world of fonts. It was a really good time.
After people played the game, they also got a pair of socks, which Marie lovingly designed. One pair said, "I'm font of you," and I think the other pair was some nice Helvetica set in pink and red.
More pink.
Those were a big hit, I will say.
More Barbie core.
I had so much fun hanging out at the booth, talking to people, watching strangers come in and play this game together and walking away like with a new friendship. We did have a blast. I mean, Livia wasn't even scheduled to work at this particular activity, and she worked most of the week there because it was so fun. She just did it because she wanted to. That's how fun it was.
I really did. I had a great time.
Did you happen to do the font connection activity?
No, I'd love to do it though. What is it?
It's basically a dating app, but for fonts.
That is so fun. Okay, sign me up.
So did you do the font connection activity?
We did.
And did you match?
In a toxic relationship, yeah.
Yeah, we got 33%.
Those last 2 voices that you heard were Adobe MAX attendees Hannah and Cece sharing the results of their match.
Oof, 33%. That cannot be good. What does that mean?
They didn't get any socks. I was kidding.
What that means is the fonts that they ended up with at the end of this game were not compatible.
But they did get socks, right? They did get socks. Everybody got socks.
Everybody got socks. Please do not worry.
Except me.
None for you.
Did you do our font connection activity here yet?
Not yet. I'm waiting to, but I'm very excited. Looks very fun. I've always said we needed a font dating game.
We're working on that with Netflix. Do you have a favorite font or a favorite selection of fonts that you rely on?
That's a good question. I feel like I'm super fickle with them. For a long time it was Montserrat because it was a go-to, it was easy. I really like Dia right now and Fletcher. I've been into sort of those, like, pick a super uniform, easy type, and then pick a really bold, almost odd, not connective type. My whole new site is every letter is a different font, so just blending nonsense together, so.
It's funny, a few people have said that they sort of cycle through favorites. So do you find yourself kind of falling in love with one and then kind of like falling out, you're on the rocks, and then you move on, and then you come back and kind of cycle through a lot of different options over time?
Yeah, I mean, I think that is the hardest thing about typography design and branding and type in general is that it is a constant design element. You could stare at it for 4,000 words on a web page, in a book, whatever. So it has to, like, captivate you. And I think most people might not think about it, but the second that you notice it, you notice it. So
variety is the spice of life.
Yeah, and you guys have 150,000 fonts, so there you go. Nobody told me to say that either. I just remembered that.
It's a very memorable number. We're all very pleased with it.
So Cameron, like a lot of people, puts a lot of thought into fonts. And people have really strong opinions. They have favorites, they have least favorites, they have desert island fonts, and they have fonts they would never use if you paid them a certain amount of money. Probably like $1 million people would use any font. We did walk around the booth asking people to talk about their favorites, and we got some really interesting answers.
My name is Ashley Rice, and I'm currently an MBA student at the University of Massachusetts Amherst.
Do you have a favorite font?
I think I always kind of gravitate towards maybe Century Gothic.
Hi, my name is Victoria. I work for a fashion company in Montreal, Canada.
Do you happen to have a favorite font?
Do I have a favorite font? Right now, it's Montreal New.
I love Avenir. Avenir is so clean and minimal, and I feel like you can use it across a lot. But it also has personality as well.
I love to stay in the sans serifs. Safe, nice, crisp, and clean.
Anything kind of, gothic-y.
Accidents Grotesque is a fan favorite. I'm a big fan of that era of design.
Guild Sans.
Very British.
Very British.
I'm keeping it OG with Old English.
I'm Nate. I go to school at Park University in Kansas City, Missouri.
Do you have a favorite font or a favorite font style that you like to work with the most in your projects?
I really love really super wide, super thick sans serif fonts. I think they're very versatile with what you can do with the shape that they create and the area inside of them.
What's your kind of interest in graphic design? What do you like to design the most? What kind of projects? What's your personal style?
I really like doing typographic posters and infusing type that's already out there as well with custom type that I make.
Cool. Did you get a pair of socks?
Yeah, I got a pair of socks.
Nice. Well, wear them with pride. Thank you for taking a few minutes to talk with us.
So color was definitely a big theme throughout this whole week, from the pink and red of our booth, and then we were talking about Xipeng's work. Kadley, was there anybody else in the same kind of vein that stood out to you?
Yes. So I had the honor of meeting and speaking with Nubia Navarro, who is a lettering artist and designer. She lives in Bogota in Colombia, and her style is very vibrant, maximalist with colors. Even the way she dressed, she had on the craziest combination of colors and patterns, but somehow it looked perfect. The color matching and pattern matching was just on point, and it comes through in her work. So she came over to the booth and we got to interview her, and we also saw her speak, I don't know, maybe the next day. And Livia, that was a talk where we were both crying.
Yeah, I was there too. It was really, really beautiful.
Yeah, Nubia talked about finding her unique voice as an artist, and especially as a queer artist and designer, which I think resonates with a lot of people. So
it was beautiful.
But then the work was so impressive. She showed off 4 different projects, one of which where she learned how to design 3D typography, and it was the 36 Days of Type, which is a project that a lot of type designers and designers participate in on social media every year. She was super ambitious and just learned 3D design and designed a letter each day and was just I just started every day, just whipped out this amazing masterpiece of anyone who knows anything about 3D. It takes an insane amount of work and time.
Yeah. And what really struck me about her talking about that project was that she started each morning, whatever she had at the end of the day, that was the finished product. And it ended up being super, super impressive. So I cannot wait to hear your conversation.
Hi, my name is Nubia. I'm originally from Venezuela. I currently live in Colombia, in Bogota, Colombia.
Hi, Nubia. Thank you so much for being here today. Could you try to describe your visual style for our listeners?
Okay, it's very bold graphics most of the time. I consider myself a color alchemist. So I love color. I like bold shapes. I like textures, patterns a lot. So my session is going to be kind of related to how to create patterns, but in a very, very simple way.
I know you're going to be speaking, and you've spoken how many times at Max before?
This is the 3rd time in a row.
So what are you going to be talking about on Thursday?
So it's mostly a boost of inspiration. It's very based on how to find your voice and how to tell your unique story.
And how have you yourself found your voice as a designer and told your own unique story?
I think that mostly through practice. Most of the time I find myself trying to create, but I don't know where to start. So I have discovered that the first place to look for is on oneself. So that's how I'm gonna try to, with my talk, give this kind of path so people can ask questions to themselves. I mean, my talk is mostly about questions, so people will get out of it with a bunch of them. So this way they can try to find something to create for them.
Can you tell me a little bit about your background as a creative, like what you've been doing until you've got here?
So my first job was in Cabimas, Venezuela, the city I am from. I worked like at a print agency, something like that. And then I tried to go bigger and I moved out of the country. I have worked and collaborated with a few agencies and a few folks that have made my road easier, let's call it like that, because this kind of collaboration is always very, very good in your creative path.
And now are you independent?
That's a great question because most people think that I am independent, but I consider myself the Hannah Montana of the design because I had to work at 9 to 6 where I do a lot of stuff, storyboard, illustration, branding at an agency, and then I do my stuff at night. So yeah, most of the time I find myself trying to fight in front of Nubia and Nubikini because I have constructed this kind of alter ego, and yeah, it's very fun, but I'm not independent. I wish I will soon, but yeah.
What are the types of projects and work you're doing at night that are like the projects, those passion projects?
They are mostly personal projects, collaboration, mostly branding, experimentation with 3D most of the time too. It's always related to color, to type. Yeah, I put some like music on, and if I don't know where to start, I take the lyrics of the song, something as simple as that, and I try to like experiment with type and lettering.
Nubia calls herself a color alchemist, which is just a super cool way of putting exactly what she does.
I would say that is the most accurate term I could possibly think of for kind of describing her personality and her work. Just going through her presentation, I feel like I could notice the use of pink in almost everything, which I absolutely love. Again, Barbiecore keeps coming up again and again, but she has such a talent for matching it with the right kinds of complementary colors and just making the whole thing work.
Now, Cadley, to put it bluntly, you basically ambushed our next guest, didn't you?
I sure did. Our next guest was F. Gerard Cruz. He's the director of operations at Xfinity Creative. And in doing research on the sessions I wanted to attend, his really stood out to me because he built an in-house agency within Comcast, which is a similar process that we're sort of going through at Monotype, building out our creative team. He also has a super cool background. He started multiple fashion brands, a boutique agency. He manages a rapper. He started building out the team of this agency that he was building out in 2020 when everyone was remote. So there was a lot of like care and attention that he had to put into bringing people together virtually, getting the right people without ever actually really meeting them. What I walked away from F's talk with mostly was just the importance of creating this feeling of connection between people, even when they're working maybe thousands of miles apart, which can be really hard.
Hey, my name is F from Gerard Cruz. I'm from Comcast Xfinity's in-house agency, Xfinity Creative.
Can you just tell me a little bit about your backgrounds?
Totally, yeah. So I came from the fashion streetwear world. I had a couple of brands of my own prior to this. You know, I had a VC-funded fashion brand called Rivals of Time when I came out of college. And then I had a relatively successful brand called Fresh Goods, where we were in over 200 stores across the globe, worn by a ton of different celebs. You know, it was a really cool time. And then I diversified myself just because I met so many people within that fashion world that needed, you know, graphic design work, websites, apps, you know, things of that nature. And out of just necessity, I was like, okay, I have to learn how to do this too, you know? Then I built a team around that. And so I launched a boutique digital marketing agency with my sister called Red Kind Media. We had our offices in Chelsea, New York, and it was split between different boutique agencies as well as artist residencies. I even started managing one of my closest friends who raps, and he goes by Dubziano. And so, you know, just having these networks between fashion, music, and technology, it was just something that I said, hey, this is the next renaissance. You know, I want to be the next renaissance man. And so I've been working towards that ever since then.
Amazing. So how did you then make the transition into building out a full agency within Comcast? It's kind of like a crazy leap.
Yeah, I mean, trust me, it was something that I was totally against for the longest time, right? I was like, am I really gonna go corporate, like fully? You know, at least like being in just traditional agency stuff, you kind of still feel like you're running your own business. But, you know, the name of the original agency was called Good Kid. And that really attracted me, right? Like it was something that I said, it's worth taking that risk. And at the same time too, you know, I started becoming more of like a bill collector than I was a creative director at my boutique agency. One thing I realized, I said, hey, I really want to learn how to scale this beyond what I have right now. You know, I had at its peak maybe a team of 30 people with our offices in Midtown, and I said, you know what, I'm hitting a ceiling right now. You know, I got to figure out how I could actually make these people more successful, right? Like it wasn't just even about myself. So that's really where I made that big leap where I said, okay, let me go somewhere else and learn how to build this with almost a bottomless pit of money. You know, like you're not over here just trying to find clients all the time and becoming a salesman for every reason. So at least taking that sort of pressure off it let me understand how to actually run a business, you know, from the ground up. So I really wanted to learn that, and that made me decide, okay, it's okay to be corporate for a little bit and learn this world, because I could take that and sort of bring it back to the team that I love and teach them and learn how to scale it beyond the ceiling that we've been. Another, you know, they always say that, right? It's like one ceiling is just another floor. So I was like, all right, I'm ready to take it to the next level.
Thank you so much for taking the time to talk with me, and yeah, glad I was able to make it to your talk.
Thank you so much for having me.
This interview with F really reminded me of something that we noticed again and again throughout the entire conference. It's this idea about creating outside of your 9-to-5 job, creating for the joy of it. And I think this also ties in with something that we mentioned earlier, is this idea of, you know, designers having their work be an extension of themselves or a reflection for how they experience the world. And there's no, you know, 9-to-5 constraint on something like that.
Yeah, and for all the people we met who really bring themselves to their work, we also talked to some people who are passionate about the work they do outside of their job. While I was, again, wandering around the booth with my gear on, I ran into Kevin, and we talked about the importance of finding things you love to do outside of work and nurturing your creative instincts that way.
So what about outside work? Do you have any creative practice outside of work, or any design that you do just for yourself, or any creative work you do just for yourself?
Yeah, so I'm a musician. It's very much like a hobby thing where I write my own music, and then I go play shows, and then, you know, that's kind of a very all-inclusive creative space for me. So I can write my music, I can design my artwork and my flyers for shows, and, you know, edit videos. Music is a really nice platform to touch a bunch of practices, and it's a good excuse to learn stuff too. Like, oh, I should learn After Effects for this song.
You know, it's funny, we had John Rochelle from Comic Craft Type in here yesterday. He's a partner of ours, and he was talking about being in bands in high school and getting into design that way. What is it about music and design that connects the two? It feels like the two are inextricably linked.
My personal stance on this is everything is storytelling. A stop sign is a design that tells us the story of safety, and music is a very personal story or a very political story, however you want to write the song. So I think it's all telling a story.
So guys, we asked a lot of people at Adobe MAX what their favorite font was, but we didn't actually ask each other, so I'm putting you on the spot now. What's your favorite? Livia, go.
Ooh, I was not prepared for this question. I need 2 to 3 business days to think about it, please. Cadley, why don't you go first?
I think my favorite font is Dido. It's really high contrast, really lovely serif. I worked on a project in college in a type course that I had where I designed some specimen posters, and that was the typeface I chose to use, and I kind of just fell in love with it then and have really just been in love with it ever since. What's your favorite font, Carl?
My answer is simple. It's Futura. I just love Futura and all its permutations. I know it's ubiquitous and not the most original choice, but I don't care. I love it. Although I did just pick up a sheet of Pioneer, which is like a cool display font. It's very angular and very sort of boxy. Look it up. And I really like it as well. But Futura forever.
Now, do you have a personal favorite font or style?
I don't have a favorite. Of course, a lot of the ones I lean on are like Avenir, just because it's web friendly, Futura.
I'm looking at Helvetica on the wall, and such a pleasure to see. It's so nice on the eyes.
Actually, I low-key love it as well.
I'm not really a type nerd insofar as like I'm not elitist about it. I don't even really understand the history of fonts that much. You know, I just look at it and go like, I like that, and that works. I try to think a little bit more like a consumer when I'm looking at fonts and less like a graphic design historian. So I'll be talking to a typographer and just wreck their whole world. Like, you make my favorite font, like, even though it comes in multiple weights.
My go-to type is called Sharp Grotesque by SharpType, which I use all the time. But I'm also truly obsessed with this font called Owners, done by Monotype in Los Angeles. It's truly one of those super versatile font family that you can do a lot with.
Do you have a favorite font?
Yes, and it's actually the one that I use for my personal branding, and it's Montserrat.
What is your favorite font to use in the work that you do?
Oh, it's got to be Comic Sans.
Is that a real answer?
Absolutely not.
We want to end this episode with a few more interviews. Livia, we'll hear your conversation with Max speaker and Adobe evangelist Kelsey Slay. But before that, a guest that I was really excited to meet. And let me tell you, one of the strangest things you can find at a conference that is ostensibly about digital design is a letterpress printer. But that's exactly what was set up in the rear of the booth floor. And it was being operated by a company from Minnesota called Studio on Fire. So naturally, I'm like a moth to flame when I see old machinery, and I was checking it out and got to chatting with Ben Levitz from Studio on Fire, who graciously came over to our booth and spoke for a while. And what I want to make sure I mention here is that the day after we spoke with him, he came back to our booth on his own and he gave us all gifts. He gave us these amazing little pins. We should probably put a photo of it up on our social feed because they were just the coolest little things. Do you guys have yours?
Yes.
I do. After the conference, when I was kind of unpacking my suitcase, taking everything out, all the little trinkets and gifts that we kind of gathered from our time at Max. It was such a nice little reminder of all the amazing and creative people that we met. It was great.
For our listeners, it's this really cool little pin. I don't know if it's like a logo or something to represent their studio, but the way that it was given to us, it's in this like pop-up letterpress, almost like a pop-up book where you open it and this tongue like spits out and the pin is attached to that. So I haven't even taken the pin out because it's so cool. I just keep showing people.
Yeah, it's called the Printer's Devil, and it's a little cartoon devil printed in copper and silver in different colors. So we'll post a photo. It's just something that I've experienced a lot within the sort of handmade DIY printing space, is this tendency to just give stuff away for free. And I think it's sort of an old school way of, you know, showing gratitude for your people's, you know, supporting your business or spreading the wealth of all this creativity. So thank you, Ben. And here is my chat with Ben Levitz from Studio on Fire.
My name is Ben Levitz. I'm the principal at Studio on Fire in St. Paul, Minnesota. And I'm here with Studio on Fire. Our company is a specialty printer specializing in letterpress, foil stamping, and doing things in a really premium way in the print world. So we exist as a company since 1999. Got into it as a very young designer. I went to art college for communication design, and I graduated in 1998. That was a time that a lot of Mac clones were out, and so I, was even at that point in the late 90s spending 8-10 hours a day in front of a computer. And my first design job, and I was like, man, that isn't what I thought creative was going to be about. That kind of sucks. I need a hobby to do something. And I had thought in school, well, maybe I'll get a welder and, do something hands-on in a shop. And but then I back into the school days a little bit. I did my senior thesis on a typographer named William Dwiggins. And Dwiggins designed, of course, for Linotype back in the day. But what I was struck by is that those typographers intimately knew the production value behind, and they understood the production process for what they were creating for. So they understood cutting punches and drawing letter forms. So fast forward, I never did a printmaking class in college, but I got out of school, started thinking about, oh gosh, I got to do something that's not in front of a computer. Thought back to my thesis work. I said, honey, I think I want to get a letterpress and move it into our basement. and I have a very, very patient wife and now business partner as this thing has grown from a hobby into a business. We started in 1999 in the home basement and have grown into a 30-person company today. And we do work for creatives all over the country. And it's generally stuff that is in the production space of premium. So focusing on premium versus commodity, because that premium space really allows us to do things that are unique and textural and tactile. That's what I love about design, is that tactility. It's not just a visual thing, it's a tactile touch thing, and that makes people stop and consider things and maybe even keep the piece that you receive and have in front of you.
Well, I mean, the work you have displayed is incredible. It's intricate layers of foils, different color foils, a lot of texture and a lot of detail, and I would imagine a lot of layers of printing. So maybe you can talk a bit about how you sort of developed that aesthetic, how you refined the process of producing such high quality, refined print work.
Absolutely. I think the process as I envisioned it as a new to letterpress designer was, you get all of this really amazing lead type and wood type, and then you start making things. And I got 6 cabinets of lead type, and it was from this old guy that had...
You do have a patient wife.
and man, that stuff is so heavy. But you start setting 6-point type for a business card with the tweezers, and it brings a whole new meaning to setting type and leading and spacing and understanding those kind of typographic terms that you learned in school firsthand. And that was really valuable as a young designer, and I absolutely hated it. And I thought that, I'm going to get rid of this type. This is not what I want to do. But I loved the result, the tactility of the process. And so early on, I learned plate making, and that photopolymer process allowed a more modern aesthetic to be introduced. It's a process with letterpress, with foil stamping, with embossing. There's one thing that happens at a time. It's not like you put a piece of paper into the press and it comes out with 6 colors of letterpress on it. It's 6 separate passes through the press. It's a very iterative, consecutive, you're building layer upon layer with that production process. And that's what I love about it, it makes you think about what you can do with a limited set of design variables. And so much of other media in the electronic space and online social media, it gives you a really vast visual landscape. But I like how print design, especially letterpress and foil, it distills that down, and it kind of forces your design through a filter that you have to consider because of the process. And that's what I love about it.
And so on that note, as I was sort of standing near your booth and watching, I saw something in some of the people visiting your booth that I recognized before, which is in a world where a lot of design happens now on screens like you were describing earlier, and a lot of it is digital. And I mean, we're here at a conference with 10,000 people that's based around digital design products. When people see a mechanical device pulled and in motion and produce something like printed and real, it's kind of like a light bulb goes off. And I was saying to someone else at your booth that I remember the first time I saw a Monotype machine in operation, and I was like, it looked like a giant mechanical spider that could get up and walk away. And it connects you to the design process in a way that screens just don't, and that's not a knock on anything digital. But have you had that experience yourself, seeing people's eyes light up when they pull a crank and produce a thing?
Yes, actually, so the idea that I could do something other than handset type, there was a letterpress shop that existed in Minnesota called Blink Publishing. Bill Moran, he also was instrumental in Hamilton wood type. But back in the day, I was at that transition point of like figuring out like, oh, you know, what am I going to do? Should I get a welder and do something tactile that way? But I walked into Bill's shop at the time, and he had this amazing collection of wood type that he had just gotten, I believe, from Augsburg College Press. But in his shop, I saw this antique Chandler and Price, decorative flywheel letterpress, and literally on the table next to it, there was a Jelly Bean style Macintosh computer, from this is the late 90s here, mind you. So that was the two things that were sitting next to each other. And the fact that those two things could exist in that proximity to each other, it was like, this is a design path here. This is what I want as my hobby in my basement. So I went home, and it was at that point I said, honey, I don't want that welder anymore. I think I want a letterpress. And me and 6 of my strongest friends moved a letterpress that I found in Chicago at the time down a flight of stairs into our basement. And that's where the hobby started.
Studio on Fire does absolutely incredible work. The intricacy of their printing is just second to none. They print in foils and all sorts of different ink colors and things like that. It's just really, really cool stuff. So definitely go check them out at studioonfire.com. Now, our last guest is actually a bit of a momentous occasion here for us because, Livia, this was your first official interview on Creative Characters, and I think you nailed it. How did it feel?
Thank you. It felt great. I was definitely a little bit nervous to start, but Kelsey, our guest, was such a joy to talk to that it made the whole thing just feel so natural.
Who is Kelsey? Why was she in our booth?
So Kelsey Slay is an Adobe community manager. She's also a graphic designer. She did a session at Max about design workflow tips. So some very practical advice for designers to speed up their entire workflow process using the Adobe suite. And something that's really interesting about Kelsey is that Adobe actually found her through her TikTok. So she has a background in design. She posts a ton of her passion projects that she does, again, kind of outside of her 9-to-5, and that's how she was discovered. She gets a lot of inspiration from kind of like the post-punk DIY scene. So she described her work as kind of dark and gritty. And actually, small plug here, but we are just past Halloween, and she did this kind of Halloween-themed daily series on her Instagram, which I think lended itself so well to her style. So here's Kelsey.
Hey, so my name's Kelsey Slay, and yes, my last name really is Slay. That's probably the biggest question I get. It's on my birth certificate, so I have that to prove it. I am a graphic designer, content creator, and also an Adobe evangelist.
My follow-up question was going to be about your last name, so I'm glad that we got that out of the way. What are your kind of like desert island fonts? What do you kind of like look for when you're selecting a typeface?
I'm super into like spooky and like grunge stuff. I mean, obviously, look at me. So I definitely am finding, as I've kind of started to venture into finding my own style, I definitely love more like dark and really gritty and just like raw kind of fonts. Not necessarily the super clean is like obviously not my style.
And how did you kind of get into graphic design? How did you start kind of playing around with design and I mean Adobe products in general?
Yeah, so in high school, I really loved painting, and it was actually really funny. My dad is probably the most logical person in the world and told me that I should go to art school. So hearing that from him was like, yeah, I guess this is a sign. So I went to art school, and I was thinking that I was going to focus on painting, but I accidentally enrolled in graphic design 1 and 2 in the same semester, and no one caught it. So I had to spend a whole semester really attending YouTube University to learn all of it, and I just really fell in love with it. And so that's when I decided to change my focus to graphic design, and I've been designing really ever since.
I love it. And you say that your dad kind of almost told you go to art school despite being kind of like pragmatic and logical. Why do you think that is?
Yeah, I wouldn't say that I was like specifically like artistic. I mean, I did win a drawing contest in the 2nd grade and it was a horse. So, I mean, maybe it was there and I just never discovered it until high school. I think my dad just kind of knows my personality really well, and he just knew that I probably wouldn't survive in a boring career. And I think also my dad from early on, I feel like him and my parents really believed in me going to art school and thought I had the talent to make it in the creative industry.
I love it. And how has your journey since school been? How did you kind of end up where you are now?
Yeah, so it hasn't always been as glamorous as working at Adobe. I actually dropped out of school and I started working as a full-time designer for my college, ironically. So then I kind of gained some opportunities there, worked at the print department. Like I said, it really wasn't glamorous at all, but it gave me a really strong foundation in print design, and it also was really good on my resume. So then I ended up moving on to agency, freelancing work, and kind of just working for a variety of clients. And actually, Adobe discovered me for my TikTok page, of all things. So in 2022, I started posting TikToks because I was bored and I just wanted to film funny design TikToks and kind of share my passion for design online. And that's where Adobe discovered me and actually reached out to me about a job. It was crazy to think that, my TikTok page ever led to anything. And so I've been able to grow that tremendously by partnering with them and also working for them.
That is awesome. I feel like something that we keep hearing at the conference this week is this idea of designers kind of trying to put themselves out there on social media in hopes to kind of get their work out there. What is like one piece of advice that you would share with somebody that's kind of just experimenting with trying to find a community out there on social?
Yeah, I would say just start. I think when I started my TikTok account, I had no intentions of growing it. It was just for fun. I didn't have any expectations, and that's why I loved creating, because I didn't feel this pressure of like, oh, I have to be somebody or I have to grow. It was more so about, I just want to express stuff. And also, I think sometimes we have this long list of, I need the perfect camera, I need the perfect setup, I need this, I need this, and I need this, and we never start. You have to start somewhere, and the content I was making over a year ago, I look back and hate it. Don't think it's that great, but the time's going to pass either way, so you just got to start.
I love what you just said, the time is going to pass anyway, so you might as well just start. I think that is so great.
Well, folks, another Adobe MAX in the books. Cadley, Livia, what was your take on this year's event overall?
Well, it was my first Adobe MAX ever. It definitely lived up to all of the hype. I, got to meet so many people that I don't think I could have, met in person. Otherwise, people that I really look up to and admire. It was a good time.
I would echo that. I feel like this year I just made so many connections. Like it's amazing to be with all my Monotype colleagues in person, but I made so many new friends that when I came home, I almost had this like weird bittersweet feeling of sadness, like coming home, just like missing the new people that I had met. It's been nice to just kind of like build out the community a little more. And that could only really happen at an event like Adobe MAX.
I could not agree more. And Livia, you're not getting off this recording without answering, what is your favorite font?
Okay, I'm gonna give a kind of a cop-out response. I don't have one favorite font that's kind of like my all-time favorite. It kind of fluctuates, but recently I've really been loving Recoleta by Monotype. It's very soft, very gentle, kind of has like a vintage 1970s vibe to it.
And Monotype, coincidentally, is another Foundry partner.
They sure are.
We love them.
Well, congratulations, everyone. You've made it this far. Thank you for listening. Thank you to everyone we spoke with. We could not fit every interview that we recorded into this episode, but it was really wonderful to meet so many different people and hear so many different stories and perspectives on design. And we hope you all enjoyed your visit to our booth and enjoyed Adobe MAX 2023. And hopefully we'll see you there next year. Thanks for listening. For more episodes of Creative Characters, you can find us on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or your podcast provider of choice. Please give us a follow. In addition, we'd love if you could give a follow to all of the people who appeared on this episode. We'll post as many of their social handles in our description and our social posts as we can.
As always, look for a link to our blog post in the show notes of this episode and check out monotype.com/podcast to read about all of our prior guests. If you've been enjoying our podcast, please go to Apple Podcasts or Spotify to rate and review this episode. And if you really like us, subscribe to the show and share us with your friends. Creative Characters is brought to you by Monotype. It is produced by Christopher Olin, Mia Sullivan, and Marie Tabarez. We will be back with more episodes soon. Take care, everybody.